Well, thank you all for coming out today. I appreciate it very much. And I'll make a point of finishing up at 12:50. A lot of students here, and you've got to get on to classes. And I'm hoping to leave enough time for questions. I'll do my best. This is a map of the Bears Ears National Monument. That's Heather Martin, who's indispensable to my work. She's a faculty assistant at the law school, and that's one of our great shops. We have several within the building, and that's one of the best. This is the Bears Ears National Monument. No longer the proposed Bears Ears National Monument, but it fully exists. This is the Four Corners area here, and so this is roughly the Arizona-Utah line. Flagstaff is down below the map, but if you come up Route 160, right about here, about 40 miles south, you can look up and see Bears Ears. And it is one of those formations that you look at and you say, hey, that looks like Bears Ears. Now, we didn't today put on a classic Bears Ears photograph. I don't know why, but you'll see it's not exactly the classic vision of it. But it is from down here, and actually you can see it from every direction. And it's a 1.35 acre national monument, kind of 60 miles from north to south. Here's Bluff. There's Moab. Everybody knows where Moab is. At least everybody in this room knows where Moab is. If we were in New York, I wouldn't be able to say that. And it's the second largest national monument. Monument's almost synonymous with national park. And the second is the Grand Staircase, Escalante National Monument, 1.7 million acres over here to the west. Nobody knows for sure how many tribes visited and inhabited this area since time immemorial. 30 is a conservative number. All the Puebloan people came here, but many others also. And they, some came and stayed, some just passed through, some came and left. But by the mid-1800s, there was a pretty big population in Bears Ears, and the United States of America just moved them out. And they did it at gunpoint. The most famous part of this removal was the Navajo Long Walk, and many Navajo people were holed up here, fighting back, looking for cover, looking for hiding. In great numbers, people were moved out and sent to reservations. They came back. They had families here. They had sacred places here. They had gathering here. They had hunting here. And they couldn't help but come back. And the early Mormon settlement was very active. The Hole in the Rock Trail is inspiring by any terms. 6 months of real hard labor for Mormon people to get down here and make the first settlement in Bluff. And before long, they considered it theirs. And although it's virtually all public land down here, they would drive Indian people off. A lot of insults were thrown their way, but people kept coming back. Go back to the reservation. Go back to your place. This is our place. But they kept coming. And late in the 1800s, the looting started. The Wetherill brothers, who knew that range, saw some of the pueblos. Some are at Mesa Verde National Park now, and they did a lot of looting of pots, all kinds of wearing apparel, and then and soon thereafter, human remains too. Just dig them up and take them to a museum for sale. And it was hard on Indian people, tremendously painful. And when Bobby Kennedy came through, first presidential candidate apparently ever to visit an Indian reservation, came through in '68 and held a meeting not far from Bluff, Navajo people explained to him the looting and how this had to be stopped and the destruction. And he said, I promise you I'll look into it. And of course we lost him soon thereafter, but that tenacity was there then. Then, in the best date, you can make it a little earlier, a little later, would be 2010, when Utah Dene Bakea, a nonprofit of Navajo and some Ute people, came together, formed a conservation organization basically, and right away had their eye on protecting this area, because so much down here at least has the protection of national park status, national park, national forest even, although there's some looting there too, but there's less than on BLM lands. And so they wanted either to have the president declare a national monument under the 1906 Antiquities Act, or to get involved in the Utah delegation, which was doing a public land initiative in hopes of resolving long-standing disputes in southern Utah. This is fantastic country. Wallace Stegner said of the southern part of the Grand Staircase that it fills up the eye and overflows the soul. And for those of you who've been down there, you know what he means. And so they, Utah Dene Bakea, went about establishing a cultural boundary for a national monument. And usually, because all past, not all past national monuments, but most past national monuments were set up for their scenic wonders. And so it would be done on that basis. But this was a cultural map. And it reached 1.7 million acres of heartland. There's plenty of what we now call archaeological resources, which means ancient societies' leavings. But they didn't try to include everything. It was a reasonable proposal in terms of good land management. 1.7 million acres is the right number. Then a meeting took place on July 16th, 2015. It was the first time I had participated directly in this. I knew about it. I was following UDB's work, largely as a trustee in the Grand Canyon Trust. And this came before us a lot. And it was a great meeting. I think it's a historic meeting, at which point they did a number of things. But the main thing was to realize that UDB had done exceptional work, but that federal Indian policy is built around tribes, and that Indian people in a nonprofit are not a tribe, and they're not a government. And the United States, for example, made treaties with tribes. And so several people said, you know, UDB's done great work, but we need this to be brought by the tribes. And very quickly, people agreed at that moment to form the Bears Ears InterTribal Coalition, the mission of which was to have the Bears Ears cultural area be protected. And I have to tell you, what an amazing organization. You can't say organization. What an amazing entity it was. And so many people came in and gave their time to this. Bears Ears InterTribal Coalition has never had an employee. It has a budget because foundations got on it right away, and quite a bit of enough foundation money came in. There were a lot of trips back to Washington, and so there was money for that, but not an employee in sight. But 20, 30, 40 people putting in intensive work on it. And I was, at this meeting, was named the senior advisor to the coalition, a designation that always has felt so much of an honor and privilege to me. And so the other thing, one other thing that they did on that July 16th was to make just a blood promise to file a comprehensive proposal that told the whole story and made the whole proposal of what the tribes wanted by October 5th, 2015. And it was funny because the joke became, as opposed to October 16th, because everybody here knows what what a deadline can do. And so if we're going to get it done this fall, or we're going to get it done in October or mid-October, no, October 15th. And a great amount of work went into it. And it is a tribal document, and there were 4 day-long meetings to go over the proposal page by page, memorable moments in I think all of our lives. The tribal adjustments and comments and improvements were beyond the saying how numerous they were. And so the proposal did go in for a 1.7 million acre reservation into the president on October 15th. Now, what was the group trying to protect? There's Bears Ears at sunset, looking to the southwest, and that's Navajo Mountain in the background. Fallen Roof Village, Cedar Mesa. Probably 1,500 years ago. Rock art on Cedar Mesa. These are pictographs. White Canyon. During the process During the process, the Utah delegation just battered this proposal. So did the governor, so did the attorney general. Opinion in the state was split, about even, between people who wanted Bears Ears and who didn't. Nationally, it was overwhelming. New York Times gave strong editorials twice, LA Times, but just people nationally. This really resonated with them. The land was great, and the proposal was that the tribes would co-manage, collaboratively manage this new monument with the United States. Never been done on the public lands before. The tribes in the Pacific Northwest co-manage the fisheries out there. But that's not public lands, and this would be the first time on federal public lands. And there was great support in favor of this proposal, but not with the Utah delegation. And they came at it with everything they had. And I want to say, in other words, what I'm saying is Senator Lee, Senator Hatch, Congressman, two different congressmen really, it was their first priority, the first thing they raised with the new president after the election. That's how important it was to them personally. White Mountain, and so the administration reacted in a complicated way, I think, because I think that they knew that 1.7 million acres was the right amount for land management. And you can say politics, they wanted to appear reasonable. They hoped that maybe any violence after the proclamation would be blunted by having it be somewhat smaller. And so there were strong feelings about that. And one map came out that took it down to about 1.1 million acres. And we and the conservation groups, the tribes took the lead on this. This was the first monument ever that tribes took the lead on proposing for monument status. And the conservation groups, we worked beautifully with the conservation groups. We have a leader from the climbing community here that we just had such great support from, and we gave them great support. And all the conservation groups supported it, but the tribes took the lead. And White Canyon was one area because it's got uranium. And this is what they wanted to do with it, with the Utah delegation. They wanted to leave it open for mining, because you can't mine in national monuments, have new mines. And so the uranium in the White Mesa area, but it stayed in. It stayed in. And thankfully so. Monarch Cave on Comb Ridge, a long north-south formation that runs just west of Bluff. Amazing archaeological sources in there, including this one. So on October 15th, the tribes did provide the proposal to the president's office and the agencies exactly on time, and that day had a press conference in Washington. And I will tell you that at the end of the press conference, the Washington Press Corps applauded. You go to journalism school, and the first rule you learn is don't split infinitives, and the second one is don't applaud at a press conference. And it was magical. And so the people of Bears Ears, and this is part of a bear dance, a Ute, the traditional Ute dance. There's a summer gathering every year right on the north side of Bears Ears. Bears Ears is up behind. You'll see a photo of it in a minute. And here is Eric Deschini along with 3 tribal representatives behind him at this press conference. Eric was one of the 2 co-chairs of the coalition. This is a later gathering, and as I say, here's one side of the Bears Ears, there's the other. From this north angle, when you're up close like this, they are a wonderful formation, but are not as specifically Bears Ears. Every summer, as I say, this gathering is held. Here are Zuni dancers. Young boy learning the ropes. And here is on Secretary Jewell to the left, came out for a long full-day hearing in Bluff. 2,000 people came. It's the largest meeting in the history of Bluff by far. It was if you had a lawn before the meeting, you didn't have one afterwards because people had to park, you know. I mean, it was really, and so this was the day before. She came up to Bears Ears, and we had a wonderful gathering. And this is sort of a strange moment because that's me, but it's not really me. Terry Tempest Williams and Secretary Jewell had a relationship of real admiration for each other's work. And Terry asked me if I would bring a sprig of sage to the secretary. And I gave it to her, and you can see how moved she was. And it was a good moment. This was a big day in her life. I feel comfortable in saying that. And 2 hours after this, there was a meeting held in a large teepee with people sitting on the ground with their backs against the teepee on the inside, and she really did get very emotional there, and rightly so. We all felt that way. The Antiquities Act is very brief. It's 2 sentences long, the section we deal with, which allows the presidents to establish national monuments. There are a bunch of lawyers in this room, and people become lawyers their second day of law school. And we kind of we kind of think of procedure as being really annoying, and we understand it's all for the good, but God, it gets technical, and oh Jesus, 600 interrogatories. I mean, and I got to answer them, and so forth. Well, the Antiquities Act has no regs, no manual provisions, no little booklet, a guide to how a national monument is created. And the way I've concluded is that if you did do regs, Section 1 would be provide president with pen and ink. Section 2, president applies pen to page. And he picked up on that one time in a different context, kind of early on, because he liked the looks of this from the beginning. He didn't make a decision at the beginning. You can't do that. These are big decisions. But he liked it. And so somebody finished telling him about Bears Ears, and he turned to an aide and said, "Make sure I've got ink in my pen that day." And on December 28th, he did, as you know. The reason it was frustrating was that we didn't have a way beyond our proposal. Our proposal was really complete, but didn't have a way to provide further memos or have a hearing or a scheduled negotiating session or a pretrial conference. And so we lived with a whole lot of rumors coming out. And finally, you know, we began to figure out the rumors that were probably real, maybe 75%, and those that weren't. But it was very frustrating, made more so by the fact that Utah was weekly filing a FOIA request with the Department of Interior, Forest Service, and Council on Environmental Quality for every single document provided that week relating to Bears Ears. And it got very burdensome. And so finally, early on in the process, the administration directed us that there would be no paper or emails going back and forth. There could be phone calls, there could be some meetings, but no paper. And so it made advocacy, but I never looked at this. It was advocacy, but it also was just trying to work through a complicated problem and to get a terrific result. And I think people in the administration would agree that that's what we were doing. And to which they would add, and we would agree, a terrific and complicated result. Part of that was the idea of collaborative management because it's never been done before. And oh boy, when you think about it, how much administrative officials want precedent. They were begging us for precedent. And I, for example, I just couldn't bear to say that what happened in the Northwest is a direct precedent here because there's so many differences. And so there were people who just worried. And it went on, and of course, even when it was assumed, and everybody in this process, like probably most of you, assumed that President Clinton was going to be president, but even if she were, the sense was that the 20th would be a real barrier because then there'd be whole new people who had to come in and learn about this sacred quest. So, but finally, we made a breakthrough on collaborative management. I really trusted the people we dealt with. There were people kind of in the background who were naysayers over most things in the administration, career people, some political appointees, but certainly the people we dealt with and the departments had given us really good people to deal with were hardworking people who loved the natural world and held tribalism in high regard and were willing to work for it and finally did, for sure. On the 28th, the president issues his proclamation. And there had been a drafting group from the agencies who built it up. Secretary Jewell wasn't in it. She had some additions to the draft that they came up with, but it's in secret. It's the way that they do monuments. It's not written down anywhere, but that's how they do those proclamations. They take agency people, lock them up, and seal them from outside comment. So they went through their work and came up with this proclamation. I believe that in many, many ways, it's the most wondrous proclamation written. And I'll try to explain why. Proclamations historically were just real standard and not much. Recently, since the Clinton administration, there's been much more evocative description of the natural areas that are being reserved. But this goes farther, and I do believe that this monument is one of the finest statements about Indian culture, Indian people, that the government has ever made. They use at the top in italics the tribal names for Bears Ears. I believe that's the first time that native language has ever been referred to in a national monument proclamation. For hundreds of generations, native peoples lived in the surrounding deep canyons, etc., which constitute one of the densest and most significant cultural landscapes in the United States. And so for Indian people, ever since the original work by UDB, the idea of cultural landscapes was so important. It's a cultural landscape. Yes, it's a natural landscape, but it's a cultural landscape. And so much research went into this. I didn't mention that specifically, but UDB and then later the coalition put in so much research to show how this is culturally defined. Abundant rock art, ancient cliff dwellings, ceremonial sites, and countless other artifacts provide an extraordinary archaeological and cultural record that is important to us all. And then they go on to say how profoundly sacred it is. The area's human history referred to as vibrant and diverse. That the Moki steps, for example, illustrate the early people's ingenuity and perseverance. That's not romantic, that is factual. And I'll tell you, that's all Indian people ask for from the majority society is factual understanding of them and their cultures. These, the Doll House, Moon House, and others, allow visitors to marvel at artistry and architecture that have withstood thousands of seasons in this harsh climate. I showed you photographs of just two of those places. They allow visitors to marvel at artistry and architecture. I want to tell you this. First of all, the best backpacking trip I ever took in my life was one with my son Philip into one of these canyons in Bears Ears, long before I ever could imagine, although I often said it's got to be a national monument or park, but it was. And I want to tell you that for children, they all appreciate it when they get in and see that, Dad, Mom, how old are these? How old? How come they're still here? These bricks, they're so well cut. And then just you start to say what life was like back then, and those cultures, and that's what we do. We wonder when we go to those places. And I want to say, I just have no idea how deep the emotions are for Pueblo people who go to those sites such as we mentioned, and how much they pass on to their kids. There's native stories of creation, danger, protection, and healing. Healing. Oh boy, the tribal people emphasize that. And it made me nervous at first. And in terms of putting it into the proclamation, it sounds sort of like pseudo-junk science of some sort, of healing. But I want to tell you that I promise you I turned that off. I promise I turned it off. I don't know. Damn phone. But it is the type of stress that soldiers had decades, generations later, that Jewish people did, and this research has gone into the tribes. And so it's that stress syndrome that they mean by healing, and why they want this land to be healthy. These stories are part of the traditional knowledge that the tribes want to have brought to public lands for the first time directly and combined with Western resource management ideas. The tribes, for example, say, ecology is terrific. Ecology is terrific. But we have things that are terrific too. Let's have both of them. Now, what a statement this is, and what a basis it is for the value and importance of the collaborative management that is embodied in this proclamation. The traditional ecological knowledge amassed by Native Americans whose ancestors inhabited this region, passed down from generation to generation, offers critical insight into the historic and scientific significance of this area. Such knowledge is itself a resource to be protected. Just like those arches, just like those old villages, a resource to be protected and used in understanding and managing this landscape sustainably for generations to come. Just imagine what, and it's one of several possibilities. I think over time it will become a reality. But if federal agency people open their minds and try to make this a part of land management, you're gonna have some activities there and research coming out and information coming out. People from around the world, traditional knowledge is now being accepted as important around the world and around this country. And the tribes want to have a Bears Ears Traditional Knowledge Institute, and foundations are very interested in it, and I think it's likely to come to pass sooner rather than later. And then the collaborative management. In our original proposal, basically the way we set it up is that it was true joint management, that you couldn't have a decision without the tribes and the United States agreeing. Some federal people liked it. Some had trouble with it as a policy matter. Some of the lawyers said it wasn't permissible legally. I'm fully satisfied that the way it was presented, it was legally permissible. But it just, people set their feet in concrete, and in the end, I, in a certain way, respected it because I knew these weren't people who were haters and just obstructionists, but really felt that it wasn't the best policy. So we submitted a second proposal that is very faithfully adopted here that comes close to that. In recognition of the importance of tribal participation in the care and management of the objects, and to ensure, that's a shall word, and to ensure that management affecting the monument reflects tribal expertise and traditional and historical knowledge, a Bears Ears Commission is hereby established. That's a 5-member commission from each of the 5 tribes to provide guidance and recommendations on management. The Secretary shall meaningfully engage the commission. By the way, consultation, which tribes have so much trouble with, that's just the only word that's used. The United States shall consult with tribes, states, and counties. And this goes so much farther, that they have to meaningfully engage, and the secretaries, shall carefully and fully consider integrating the traditional and historical knowledge and special expertise of the Commission or comparable entity. And then there are other provisions that define the Commission. It was a great celebration when the proclamation came down. It was so right, so many people felt, I think a lot of people in this room felt, and so promising. Who can predict what this administration is going to try to do and what they're going to succeed in doing? I will tell you that as kind of baseline legal notions, first of all, the Secretary of Interior has no ability to eliminate a monument or to change the boundaries. At the other end of the spectrum, the Congress can do anything it wants. So that if right now, this morning, the Senate, House had passed a bill eliminating bears' ears and President Trump is about to sign it, then when he signs it, it'll be gone. He has 100% if it goes through Congress. The President, under existing law, most likely, 75%, let's say, can't eliminate it. And the reasoning in mostly in Attorney General's opinions from the 30s and before, the 1930s and before, is that the Antiquities Act, which, as I say, is 2 sentences long sentences, but 2 sentences, allow the president only to create national monuments, not to eliminate them. And so that argument has been accepted administratively. Can, as has been suggested to him by the Utah delegation, the president eliminate 2/3 of it? Probably not. Their chances are a bit better there, but probably not, under similar reasoning. But boy, would you ever not know until it gets litigated. The Supreme Court has never passed on this, and really no district courts or court of appeals either. This has not come up in the way we normally expect major public issues to have come to court. We are just last Thursday had a major meeting with tribal attorneys and conservation attorneys, and are deep into the process of being prepared to litigate immediately if President Trump does take action. The state of Utah may also sue, on the ground that it's too big or some other reason, but every single case, pushing 30 in all, that has been filed to overturn presidential proclamation, presidential discretion under the Antiquities Act has been dismissed. So the Utah claim is almost certainly likely to be rejected. They could raise some new arguments, but the courts have just said the president's discretion is extremely broad here. So let me leave it at that, and I'd love to take any questions if you have them, or comments.
Since you brought up split infinitives, I was wondering if you had any great stories about why there's no possessive S in bears' ears.
Because it's too goddamn complicated. Please, I'd be glad to.
Has there been a successful boundary change from one
Yes.
administration to another?
Yes.
And that was not disputed, that no one took legal
That's right. There have been 17 times, none recent. And I'm going to say, as in the 30s, that boundaries were diminished. And that's going to be probably their main argument, that it's different from extinguishments, complete extinguishments, and Congress seems to approve of the practice.
And were any of those 17 controversial?
The one was, the biggest one was in Olympic National Park, the Olympic National Monument at the time, and that was controversial, but very soon afterwards, all that land was taken and made into the park, including the amount that was eliminated, so. Yeah.
Did Congress create process, procedure under the Antiquities Act or in adjacent to it, or would that be in the realm of a regulatory agency, and what regulatory agency would that be?
Well, the president could adopt regs. I think that, I'm hypothesizing here, that the Interior Department and Agriculture Department could come up with combined regs or separate regs. Yeah, I think they could do it. And the president could probably do an executive order setting up a process. But it
There was a great deal of background development in producing this, and the current administration just want to take a hand and strike through it. Very simple.
the administration didn't what?
The current administration would just want to do nothing but, no background, no research.
No. We did a huge amount of research.
No, I'm saying to create it, the current administration,
Yeah.
it's hard for me to say Trump administration.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, if President Trump acted next week, which, some people say could happen, I would love to see an essay on his intent in signing that. Yeah.
Once a monument has been proclaimed, is there a prescribed timeline by which things need to happen? Or how long can this sort of languish without action?
Well, first of all, one major thing does happen, and it's just a matter of tradition, and a good one, in that essentially every major monument, and including this proclamation, the secretaries are directed to establish a land use management plan where you deal with the specifics of management in a way that a proclamation can't. So that's there. But in terms of trying to overturn it, there's no current law that's precise in any way that would say, for example, the Grand Staircase, Escalante National Monument, was 96, and Utah wants the president to eliminate it also. That's a long time ago now. And, but there isn't any specific time bar that I know of, yeah.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about this, the meaningful engagement and then the careful and full consideration? Because while they might not be able to get rid of it, if there is a secretary in place that maybe wants to deviate incredibly from what might be a responsible management.
Thank you. I mean, that's a large problem, a large potential adverse result. And so future agencies could just kind of slow walk it. They could develop kind of a hostility toward it. Maybe you could have some Secretary of Interior just send out a memo saying nobody talks to that commission or deals with that commission. I think that would make the Secretary subject to a lawsuit, but we don't know. So future administration is huge. And I tend to, the first, right at the beginning, Utah may cut congressional appropriations to the monument, financial appropriations. And I think probably they'll do that. They did that with the Grand Staircase. So I kind of look at Bears Ears short-term, mid-term, long-term. And if the tribes in the commission can stay with it, if they can do this Traditional Knowledge Institute, I think that's going to take over the long term. I think it is, but don't know. One last question.
Is Natural Bridge Monument swallowed by the management plan for Bears Ears, or are they controlled separately, separate plans?
I love it, swallowed. People in the Park Service said, don't swallow national bridges. Don't swallow it. This is wrong. And instead of being swallowed, it was excluded from this monument. Yeah. Good question. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for your interest.